mean, that's how we're all going through life, isn't it? Just not saying what we really want to say.
There's a legendary story about Larry David, going back to when he was just a struggling stand-up comedian. One night he walked on stage, looked around at the audience, and simply said, "No," and walked right off. He didn't do this because he had stage fright or anything like that. It was done as an act of defiance. He just knew his sense of humor simply wouldn't be for them. In other words, they weren't up to his standard.
Because he was a great stand-up, but he was not the type of stand-up who embraced the audience.
Ladies and gentlemen, comedy stylings of Larry David.
He was about 3 minutes up there. He wasn't really getting too many laughs, and he goes, "I don't need this. Forget it."
He threw the microphone down, called the audience a bunch of ignorant and walked off the stage.
He said, "F you." He said, "F you people." And he left the stage. I went, wow, what an act.
And this story really encapsulates what Larry David is all about. Defiance and stubbornness. He has always had his own specific ideas about comedy, no matter the social stigma or taboos surrounding them. It was a long road to success for Larry, but once he got there, he made us wonder, how did we ever manage without him? So, with that in mind, let's dig a little deeper. Larry graduated from the University of Maryland with a degree in history and went straight to the unemployment line. He did many odd jobs, including being a bra salesman and a driver. But the real turning point in his life came when he started taking acting classes and one day stopped reading the written dialogue, started doing his own routine, and people started laughing.
I took one improv class while I was doing stand-up, and I kind of liked it, and I thought, that's fun to do. Mm-hmm. And I thought I could do it. Acting, I didn't think I could do, because it just seemed so boring to me.
Larry eventually gained work as a writer-performer in the early 80s on the sketch show Fridays, which lasted only a couple of years.
Let me say something right now. I've known Mo Gaddafi ever since I was a kid. And I just can't believe that my old pal Mo would hatch a plan to assassinate Reagan. Not the Mo I know.
He then became a writer on SNL, but in 1 year managed to get only a single sketch on the air in the latest possible time slot. The sketch centered on the idea if an elevator operator is able to sit down in a chair or not while he's on duty. If you're a fellow fan of Seinfeld, does this idea seem familiar to you?
Let me ask you something. When you go into a store, does it bother you that they make the security guard just stand there all day?
No.
It didn't bother Susan either. That's why I'm different. I can sense the slightest human suffering.
Are you sensing anything right now?
Let me just say this. It is inhumane to make a man stand on his feet in one spot for 8 hours a day. Why shouldn't he have a chair?
Well, what about criminal activity? He's got to be alert.
Well, he can't jump out of the chair? How long does that take? Here, look at this. Here, watch. Criminals! Boom! I'm up! Stop it! Stop it! Stop it!
Once again, we're back to that stubbornness and defiance. Larry knew he had a funny idea. He didn't care that it would take audiences 10 years to find it funny also. He had something to say, and he'd be damned if he's not going to say it.
Maybe I'll have a talk with him.
I know you will.
In 1989, Larry co-created Seinfeld, which is one of the most successful sitcoms in history. It's no understatement to say that the show was a pop cultural phenomenon, garnering massive critical and commercial success.
That used to be Catch a Rising Star, legendary New York comedy club, where I used to work and Larry used to work, and we were standing in the bar. And I started telling him that NBC was talking to me about doing a TV show.
And would I be interested in working on it with him? And of course, I really didn't have anything going at the time, and I didn't have any money, and I said, sure, fine.
There was a uniqueness to the scripts, where the dialogue didn't have that unrealistic feel where every word was just a setup for a predictable punchline. And the stories were tightly written so that separate plot lines would cleverly weave together by the episode's climax, no matter how worlds apart they may seem. But of course, Larry would only do it on his own terms, or not at all.
Okay, look. If you want to just keep doing the same old thing, then maybe this idea is not for you. I, for one, am not going to compromise my artistic integrity. And I'll tell you something else. This is the show, and we're not going to change it. Right?
Jerry Seinfeld was the star of the show, but Larry David was the star behind the scenes. That brash style of humor that didn't work on the stand-up circuit finally started working as a TV show. And this style can be broken into 3 key areas. Firstly, the famous rule of no hugging, no learning, where the characters can't portray any sense of sentimentality and never learn their lesson. They're selfish and greedy people doing selfish, greedy things. Secondly, idioms, giving names to different types of social situations, such as the close talker, the low talker, double dip, shrinkage, yada yada yada. The use of words and language play a big part in Larry's humor, and Seinfeld was loaded with them. And lastly, questioning social etiquette. No matter the topic, if Larry can create conflict for the sake of comedy, he will do it. The award-winning episode, The Contest, is the perfect example of this. After so much success with Seinfeld, what would be his next target? Himself, of course. After ripping up the sitcom rulebook on Seinfeld, Larry ripped it up even more when he created Curb Your Enthusiasm, where he plays an exaggerated version of himself.
Things do occur where I go, this will be a good thing to do on my show, that had I said it at the time, I would have gotten something off my chest.
Larry learned from his time on Seinfeld that if the setup was good enough, you almost don't need to write any dialogue, as it almost writes itself. If the situations are crazy enough, and you have the right characters to drive and escalate the plot, then you have the perfect mix. Many shows have tried to replicate the Curb formula, but none can match Larry's talent for picking at the minutiae of daily life and getting into arguments for the most trivial of matters. And because it's on HBO, Larry has the freedom to explore stories and ideas with absolutely no restrictions. Like pretending to be an incest survivor, or accusing a woman of stealing by hiding items in her unusually large vagina. And one of the bravest aspects of Larry's sense of humor is that he isn't afraid to make it personal. He used many of his real-life experiences as stories for Seinfeld. And for Curb, he even used his real-life divorce as a story and wasn't afraid to make himself look like a fool. Perhaps presenting dark moments from his real life is his own form of therapy. To prove to himself that humor can indeed be found anywhere, and he himself is a valid target as anyone else. Larry David has become somewhat of a reluctant superstar. From appearing on talk shows, sketch shows, and movies, everyone wants a piece of Larry. Everyone that knows him says he's a rare example of someone who hasn't changed as a result of fame and fortune. He still has the same stubborn principles and neurotic observations now as he had when he was just a broke, wannabe stand-up comedian.
What drives you to keep going now?
Well, you gotta get out of the house.